Julie is a leading expert in virtual sales performance and executive presence, a pioneer of video-based selling, and author of Look Me in the Eye, the #1 sales book of 2021. She helps sales teams build credibility and influence in virtual conversations. Her coaching and training programs deliver an average of 65% improvement in engagement, presence, and buyer trust. Julie, thanks for joining us and welcome.
Wow, thank you, Marcus. It's great to be back here, the friends at Allego, and really excited about this topic. I think it's very timely because I know a lot of sales teams are struggling now to get indoors, get meetings, avoid getting ghosted, and we need all the tools we can get. And this is a little different than I think what most leaders are thinking about. And so this is really another quiver in your what do you put quivers in? I forget. In your arrow.
Yeah, they'll hold arrows.
I,
I
I
know what
should
you're talking about.
I shouldn't use metaphors I don't fully understand. Today we're going to talk about the 5 sales mistakes silently killing your meetings. Surely everyone has seen this movie by now, and I won't spoil it for you to tell you that Bruce Willis is actually dead in the movie. And unlike everyone else, he doesn't know it, right? And so this reminds me of really what we're talking about today, which is all these meetings that are really dying on the vine. They're dying early on in the meeting. And the only one who doesn't know it's dead is the salesperson, right? So this is obviously very problematic because when a sales conversation dies, people tune out. They don't pay attention with once they've made a decision about how this is coming across. There's no follow-up, right? There's no second meetings. They're not going to put you in front of the executive. You get ghosted. They don't pick up your call. They don't return your email. And of course, we lose the deal and we don't really know why. There's no clarity on that. So we change a lot of other things in our toolbox when we're not really addressing what's happening on a foundational level. So I know that there's a lot of leaders on the call here that have really prepared their teams in so many ways with methodology, and they've created a team of product or solution experts. You've got great scripts or PowerPoints. You've practiced discovery questions. They've got a compelling story, strong value prop, and the competitive offering. And that often feels like it should be enough, right? And perhaps in a less competitive market, it would be. But it's hard sometimes to think outside of our bubble and realize that, a lot of teams have great value props, have great expertise and great decks and scripts. And a lot of what they're saying is very similar to what you're saying if, in your niche. So that alone is not enough to move the scale a lot of times. And oftentimes the mistakes that are happening, what's keeping you from, winning that next meeting or sealing that deal is not the message, it's the messenger. And you've probably heard studies about first impressions, and there's studies that'll say 7 seconds, 10 seconds, 12 seconds, whatever. It's a small amount of time that people make very strong decisions about who you are when you show up. They decide, are you confident? Are you trustworthy? Are you likable? Are you worth my full attention? Now, those are pretty strong lenses through which our prospect is viewing us. And if we don't make that cut, they're going to view us a lot less differently or fully than they would if they said, yeah, wow, this person seems confident, trustworthy, credible. I want to hear what they have to say. So we have to really nail that. And the thing is that most people think it's about what we say in that first impression, right? It's, we say something, we've got the right combination of words, but it's not really about the words. It's about how people receive communication. And you may be familiar with this study where it's shown that in those first few seconds, 55% of how people perceive you comes from your physicality, right? Your physical presence, how you appear, your facial expressions, your body language. 38% just from the sound, the tone, the quality of your voice, and 7% from your words. Now, I always like to say that, of course, if your words are gibberish, it doesn't matter how great your posture is and how the dulcet tones of your voice. But assuming all things are equal, that's pretty compelling evidence that it's not necessarily about the words, unless you can't say enough in 7 to 10 seconds to really influence that person strongly one way or the other, unless it's, I've got $1 million for you, right? So that's really something that we need to look beyond, which is the words on when we're trying to fix our sales conversation rate. The other challenge is that today, and this is probably not news to all of you, that most of our sales conversations, especially initially, are taking place virtually. A study last year showed that 80% of B2B sales interactions are conducted virtually. And that makes sense. I mean, even though your team may be back in the office, perhaps the people that they're calling on are not. And that really drives the means of the communication. So that's a big factor. The other thing is that because of this, we have a real, what I call a virtual presence gap, where we have the expertise that our team has is up here, but their virtual presence is down here. And so that really is that gap that makes people think something's off, right? That incongruency. We don't, as humans, like incongruency. We don't associate that with being trustworthy and solid and confident. And so that can, put red flags up. So there's also, in this virtual environment, we're trying to have conversations, start relationships. There's a lot of what I call unaddressed challenges. And they're unaddressed because we've just sort of glossed over them with some, tips and tricks, and, that's probably good enough. When in fact, they are killing a lot of our conversations. And that is the fact that oftentimes we can't see our audience. 30% or more of executives are now off camera, right? Which gives you a lot less information, right? It's harder to connect or engage with people virtually, which we'll talk about. There's no energy or feedback coming back to us because people are just, certainly more passive, especially if you're a prospect and you're on the receiving end and you're expecting to, get pitched or see a deck. You're not going to be, fully ready to have a two-way conversation. That's not your mindset, right? People are multitasking. We've got tons of research on that. That's a given. And your focus and their focus is easily distracted. And all that adds up to your message doesn't get across, it gets confused, it gets diluted, and you don't go any farther. That meeting dies. So that problem continues with the fact that we have been so technology focused in our training on virtual presence and virtual interactions versus connection focused. We've got them set up with the right tools. You got get a camera, get on Teams, get on Zoom, learn how to navigate 2 screens, 3 screens, and that's all good and fine, and that's important. But if we're not looking at, okay, now how do we connect with people now that we have all this technology? Because it's not anymore just, can you see me? Can you hear me? It's, do you feel heard? Do you feel like I can help you? Do you feel like I'm credible? And how do we make our customers or prospects feel that so they can take in all the great information that we're sharing? So there are really 5 what I call silent mistakes. And by the way, they're only silent to us. They're glaringly obvious to our prospects, but we're in the dark about them, and we're going to bring that into the light. So the 5 mistakes killing your sales conversations, and also the secret to really making buyers feel, not just think, not just know that you can help them, but feel that they need you. And this first one is something I think we can all agree on, that there's a huge rapport gap between how we build rapport in person and how we do it virtually, right? It's one of the things that I hear salespeople just complain about the most. It's like, oh, I just can't, I used to be able to walk into a meeting and just, have this instant rapport, and it just is so awkward, and people coming in at different times, and not knowing what to say, and it's just very surface. And that is a challenge. And that the reason we're trying to build rapport is we're trying to build a relationship, right? And that's a really important foundation of sales. And Harvard Business Review wrote an article, and they found that it really is harder to build relationships virtually, and it's partly because of that rapport, right? Because we're not able to do that quickly, as opposed to when we had time with buyers in person, where we establish those relationships. So those relationships tend to stay in place. The ones we're trying to build virtually is very difficult. And it takes a longer time if we don't address it right away. And building rapport, which oftentimes we're just talking about, okay, what do I say? What's a great rapport builder? I'm always asked that question. Well, there's a million choices there, right? And certainly it's important to have something that connects you with your buyer, that shows that you care about them, know about them. But it isn't necessarily just the words, because I've had people say, how's your day going? And I know they could care less, right? So it's beyond that. And one thing about rapport that I think we don't realize is that a lot of that happens on a physical level to people. There's a hormone that got a lot of press a couple years ago that came out called oxytocin. They called it the love hormone. But it does more than, create feelings of love. It creates more feelings of trust and connectedness with others. And it is only released in a person's body under two conditions. And the first being physical contact, like shaking hands or hugging. It just, obviously it brings you closer. If you really think about that, it's definitely a relationship builder. Now, unfortunately, we can't do that virtually, can we? So that's off the table. The other way is through making direct eye contact. Direct eye contact is something we've been born understanding that it means if someone's looking at us, they care about us, they're interested in us, they want to hear from us. And that, of course, is something that we can use and we can really create on camera, but we don't, because of the difficulty of it. And relationship experts say that, about 65% of eye contact, you need to make eye contact 65% of the time to really build a relationship. Now, of course, you can build a relationship without ever making eye contact, and I know that we've all done that. However, it takes a lot longer. And in that first call, you're not going to wait till the 10th call to build a relationship, because you're not going to get a 10th call. So it's really important to do that right away. And I will say this again, but your customer does not care that you are listening or that you are interested in them if they don't feel that. And if they don't see you looking at them, they don't feel that. We can wish it was different, but that's not necessarily going to change overnight. So what I would like to do is we're going to run a little poll here and think about what's the percentage of time you think you make direct eye contact in a virtual meeting? And we've got a couple choices there, from 0 to 29%, 30 to 59%, 60 to 79%, or 80% or more.
Great. So, sorry to cut you off there, Julie. I just wanted to let folks know that it's going to be, if you've got multiple screens, it's on one of them, I promise. Get your answer in. We'll leave it open for a couple more seconds here. We've already got about 70% participation, so they're firing them off. What do you think the winner's going to be?
Boy, I think it's probably going to be 60 to 79% is my guess, what
All
people
right.
think.
All right.
We'll see, just based on past experience.
All
But
right.
I'm
We might have swayed the vote a little bit there.
curious.
Sorry about that. I
I didn't say
said
that's the right answer. I didn't say that's right.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and end it here and share the results. I'm just going to call them out for the folks on the on-demand version later
Oh,
on. For the 0 to 29%, we had about 15%
okay.
choose that one. For 30 to 59, we had 42%. So that's the winner.
Okay.
60 to 79%, 30%, and then 80 plus percent was a 12%. So
Okay.
uh,
Interesting. All right.
30,
That's good.
60, 0 to 29, and then 80 plus. All right,
Wow.
go ahead, take it
Interesting.
away.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting. Now, of course, you have probably no proof of that. So this is all our perception of how much eye contact we make. And I'll just share with you, after working with a team of a couple hundred, and we measured the amount of eye contact they were making both before the training and after. And most people are making 30% or less. All right. So you guys are, 30 to 59. You're if you're on 30, you're probably right in the range. They thought they were making more like 75%. So there's a real gap between what's actually happening and what people are seeing. Now, after the training and the practice and developing the skills to do that, knowing when it matters to make eye contact and when it's not important, they were able to make 72% eye contact. And this is while sharing software or slides. So that is possible. That is what is possible for any team out there with the right tools. So we're often underestimating, how we are connecting, how much we're connecting with our audience. So we want to try and get, like I said, 65% average eye contact necessary to build a relationship. I say it's more in virtual because they don't have other things to look at. When you're in a room with someone and you look away at their desk or their office, they know that you're still engaged with them. If you look away from the camera on a virtual meeting, nobody knows what you're looking at. It could be, of course, related to the meeting, but it just is a quick disconnect. So the second mistake I want to talk about is what I call the forgettable factor. And I hope some of you remember that game, played that game when you were children called Telephone. I think it's called Telephone, where you share a secret with someone, a phrase or a couple of words, and they repeat it to the next person and so on and so on. And it goes down the line until it comes out. And it's a completely different sentence from where it started, right? It gets garbled down there. And the reason I bring this up is because there are so many people now involved, so many stakeholders involved in buying decisions that we have to consider about how are people going to remember our message, right? That's a real critical factor. From 2017 to 25, the number of stakeholders involved in a deal almost doubled from 6.8 to 13. And how is my message going to, first of all, get moved on to the next person? And are they going to be motivated to move it on? Like, it takes a lot of effort for someone to go out on a limb for you and say, okay, I want you to talk to so-and-so, right? They're going to have to do that, not because it just sounds, it sounds like a good plan. They have to really feel compelled to do that. And we have to help that along. And that doesn't happen just by logic. And I think we've all heard this. People buy based on emotion and justify with logic. And I think we lean so heavily on logic in sales, not realizing that that emotion plays a big part in it. And so it's not always a message problem, it's a memorability problem. You've probably heard this quote from Maya Angelou, but it's beautiful, and I think it's true in business as it is in personal lives. It's people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, they'll They'll, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And that's what's really missing in helping people remember your message and motivating them to carry the message on to the next person. So instead of thinking about, gee, what do I want them to know? What do I need to say to get them to move this opportunity forward? You want to think about adding some emotion to it by thinking, how do you want your prospect to feel? Like, what do they need to feel to actually, talk to their boss to say, hey, I think this is worthy of consideration. And if you think about it, there's a lot of ways that someone could feel that would make them more compelled other than just, logic. Well, it sounds like a good idea. Even if that logic is strong, we want to support that with a really strong feeling. So maybe it's, I want them to feel excited about that. I want them to feel intrigued. I want them to feel maybe it's scared about, what might happen if they don't solve this problem quickly. So whatever it is, if you know how you want your prospect to feel, your body, your tone, your whole engagement will change dramatically. And the problem is, if you're not clear about how you want your prospect to feel about what you're saying, they're not going to be clear either, because it's just going to come out as logic, right? And what I always say is, if I can't tell from your voice, from your face, whether it's good news or bad news, then you have failed, right? You have failed to move me in any way. And I see this so often in sales. I'll see somebody say, well, this can save you $250,000 with the same energy, tone, facial expression as if they would say, would you pass the salt? Right? It's like if I didn't know what you were saying, if I didn't understand the language, I think it was like meaningless news, right? So we're not supporting our message. Of course, the message and the delivery are entwined together irrevocably, but and we're not supporting our message there with that emotion. So the next mistake is what I call the listening illusion. Deloitte did a study of 25,000 business professionals, and they asked them, what was the one thing that someone can do to build trust with you? And their answer was resoundingly listen. Now that seems like a easy task, right? No, and many salespeople are and pride themselves on being good listeners. And they may still be good listeners in a virtual environment. However, this is what virtual listening looks like in virtual meetings, right? I mean, this is what you see all the time. That person is looking down. Now, because of the way that eye contact is ingrained in us from infants, we associate that with someone looking away. Whether it's not unlike the feeling of being out with someone and they're on their phone. Now, we don't, they don't know that you're on the phone, and if I think you're on the phone, all they know is it feels like you're not listening, you're not hearing them, you're not caring. So before I go to the cues that we need to use, if you think about it, if someone was pouring their heart out to you, if they're talking about your problem, their problem, this is costing me, I've got to work extra hours because of this problem, and my team is unmotivated, etc. And you're just looking at them, looking at your screen, they're not going to feel heard, right? So you can be looking and, feeling like you're hearing them, but their perception is entirely different. So we want to incorporate what I call virtual listening cues, which is, again, looking at the camera when someone is listening, which is completely counterintuitive, I know. And that's why no one does it unless they've been trained and they have tactics and they've developed muscle memory around it, like a lot of these tools. We want to use our body language. Like, how do you react when you're listening, right? Do you nod? Do you tilt your head? We want to use authentic expressions. Now, of course, we don't want to mug for the camera, but again, your face should recognize whether it's good news or bad news, right? You tell me your business is falling apart and I've got a blank look on my face, you're not going to feel like I'm especially empathetic or hearing you. And of course, summarizing. And I think that's, certainly more of a verbal skill that we can use, but we need to do that more. And added with those other virtual cues can really elevate that feeling of being heard and understood, which we want to do to help build our relationship with customers. The fourth mistake is what I call the credibility crash. And, oftentimes we perceive ourselves one way and our audience perceives us a different way. And we need to know how our audience sees us. So if you think about it, are you the same credible, confident, empathetic person on video that you are in person? I think most of us would say, yes, I'm not any less credible. I still have the same credibility, standards, confidence, and care for people that I do, whether I'm in person with you or on a video. However, if I asked you, do you think you're perceived as the same credible, confident, empathetic person on video as you are in person? I think most of us would have to say, I don't know, right? Because we can't know that. We can't know how others perceive us. And what happens is, that credibility is one of those qualities that is very difficult to convey virtually. And so the fact is, if you don't know if you're conveying it, likely are you aren't. If you haven't adapted your presence in any way, your delivery, how you connect with people through the camera, likely you aren't not coming across as credible, confident, authentic, or empathetic as you are in person. That's a fact. And perception is reality on camera. And I know, you can feel like you're so, you're credible in your heart and you're doing everything to prove that, except being perceived as credible. And that's problematic on video. It's not fair, but that's the way it is. One of the ways, again, that we build or instill credibility with our audience is by making direct eye contact. Studies show that we are more likely to believe statements made by someone who looks us in the eye as opposed to those who avert their gaze. And of course, there's two really common types of eye contact we see on our screens. There's what I call the screen stare, right? And I know he thinks he's hearing me out, but I don't know. He could be looking at his phone. He could be reading an email. But the fact that would go through my head is already a problem. The other is the darter. And I get it. There's a million things to manage, right? You're looking at your second screen. You're looking at your tools. You're looking at your video. You're looking at yourself, which you should never do. And either way, it just comes across as you're not paying attention to them, right? You're not listening. You're not trustworthy. Marcus, you have a question?
Yeah, looks like we've got a comment from Leslie in the chat, and she said she's practicing here now, and it's hard because I'm not seeing you. I'm looking at the camera, so I'm hearing you but not seeing you.
Sure.
Any clarity on that for her?
Yes, I can give you a couple of tips, but first of all, let me just say it is incredibly hard to change our eye contact. It is, we have to practice and develop that muscle memory. So I applaud you for practicing. One thing that people don't realize is we have greater peripheral vision than we are aware. And so if we are, of course, you've got the big screen and I'm very small on this, but if you were talking to somebody, your prospect, you would just have their screen on, their picture on camera. So if you have your camera above that, you would be able to see any major changes in behavior or expression while keeping your eyes on the camera for the most part. But it is a trained skill, and there are 3 chapters in my book just on eye contact alone. So it's one of those things that sounds simple, but let me tell you, if it was simple, we'd all be doing it by now. So it's, taking the time to learn it right, to understand when to make eye contact, how to make it, how to navigate slides when you're trying to make eye contact. There's a lot more to it. There's a lot of depth to it, and it's a big difference maker. So, so started by thinking about, if you can position their picture, their image under as close to your camera as possible, that helps. And also understanding when it's important to make eye contact and when it's not. You don't always have to look at it. There's some, I call sneak peek times where you can get away without it. That's a great question, Leslie. Thanks.
It's a little bit different for a webinar, but you're right. If she was on
Yeah,
a sales call, I guess you
right,
don't want to
right.
practice on a prospect though. So good looking out, Leslie. I'll let you
Absolutely.
continue.
Yeah. So the eye contact is so important a piece of almost everything we do. That's why it keeps showing up. But this last mistake is what I call the monologue mistake. And this is something we see on so many sales conversations, presentations, demos. It's where the salesperson just keeps talking, right? And sure, that can happen in person, but it really is just magnified on camera by 50%. It's very few times that I don't have to correct someone on, take a pause, please, take a pause for me, not for you. Because there's a lot of fear around it. There's this fear of silence that we suddenly discovered when we went virtual. It's like you put something out there and there's this gaping silence that confronts you. You can't see people reacting. You don't know if they're going to add anything. And so you fill that silence. So we're afraid of that silence. We haven't learned to manage it. We don't know, we assume the worst when people are silent. And that causes panic. We speed up. We just talk at people. We disconnect. And then we never end up getting really at depth answers from our customers because we don't have the tolerance for that silence. And what I want to share with you is why that is, because a lot of this starts with understanding what's happening. And what is happening is we have been schooled on this communication loop, this natural communication loop where we say something, somebody reacts, right, which gives us feedback either verbally or they just, the facial expression or body language that happens so naturally in person. And then we respond to that, right? And it's this communication loop goes round and round. Well, that communication loop is irrevocably broken in virtual meetings. We send a message, we say something, we can't see our audience, perhaps they're not even on camera, so we don't get any visual feedback. They're not saying anything, so we're not getting any verbal feedback. So we just keep going, or we pepper them with, does that make sense? Does that make sense? Which makes us sound really, unconfident. So that's a real problem. And we have to have a base understanding of what's happening here. And so what I work with people on, and it does take work, kind of like the eye contact piece, is embracing that purposeful pause. Because if we don't, again, we miss out on all kinds of information from our customer, and we also speed up and they tune out and they miss things, and it's just an overall miss. So that purposeful pause after you ask a question, for example. And I want to share with you just what happens in that timeline of responding to a virtual question, what's going through a customer's mind. So I want you to step into the shoes of you're a prospect, and I ask you a question. So perhaps I ask you, what is of these 5 mistakes, what do you think is most important for your team to address? Now, you didn't know I was going to ask you that, so you're taking a second to go, oh, wait, what do I think? What are the mistakes? Let's see, there was there was a rapport, there was the being forgettable, there was a not bringing emotion, etc. You got to think of that. Then you're going to take a couple of seconds to go, well, I guess it's probably the building that credibility and that trust through active listening and being able to, really get that across right away. So you have an answer. And then you may think, well, should I share it? There's other people on this call. They might see that as a weakness in my team that I don't want them to see, right? And you might think, well, there's a bunch of people on here. Somebody else is surely going to answer. And then After a couple seconds, you can't stand it anymore. So you say, all right, I guess it's going to be me. And then you have to unmute yourself, if you're on a webinar, of course, and answer. Now, that whole process can take 17 to 20 seconds, right? Now, I'm not suggesting that everyone wait that long after they ask a question, because that would be unbearable, right? But let me tell you that the average amount of time that salespeople wait for a response is under 2%. Under 2%. And they feel like it's forever. That's because they don't have any desensitization, I can't say that, training to help them deal with that in the moment, right? So it's just a panic and they fill that space. They never let this process happen. So it really is important to understand what's happening with our audience, understand what happens with us, and develop, again, that muscle memory that we don't panic every time there's a silence, and we understand what 2 seconds is versus 7 seconds, right? And I usually tell people just try starting with 5 seconds. And if you can get longer, that's great. Because once you start answering your own questions, you will never get a good answer, right? You'll be answering them the rest of the call. So we don't want to train our audience that we don't expect them to answer and engage. So those are the 5 silent mistakes killing conversations that I see today that are rampant. And, from the rapport gap to being forgettable, by not tying in that emotion, to thinking we're listening but not being perceived as listening, and that gap between our credibility and, how we're coming across in terms of credibility, and also just rushing and allowing our fears to take over, are all mistakes that we can control. And that's why it's such a disservice to our teams to not help them learn these things, because there's so many things that we can't control right now in sales and the environment and the economy. And so these are actual controllable mistakes. And remembering that, it's not always the message, right? I know we're always tweaking the message, and this looks better this works on the algorithm, and this works better, when we say it this way. It's the messenger too, right? And I think we over deliver on the message side and really underserve the messenger, and help salespeople really deliver it in a way that lands. And when your sellers are able to change their on-camera behavior, everything else that you've trained them with, the methodology, the discovery questions, the expertise, is going to be 10 times more effective. So if you are ready to transform your team's sales conversations, happy to have a conversation with you. I'll give you my contact information here in a moment. But just want to share with you that the average virtual improvement that we're seeing in terms of where teams start and how they end up after a training program is 63 to 65% now, 65%. So that means most, 35% of salespeople are operating, or most salespeople are operating at 35% their potential. And that's a huge difference. There's very few areas where we can see that much growth in our salespeople, and it's immediate. So there's a number of ways that we do this that is, like I said, proven. Just knowing this information is rarely enough. So it's really starting with that awareness, which is why I do virtual assessments, which assesses each salesperson and tells them, this is why you're not seen as credible. This is what you're doing. This is what you need to change. This is why you're not getting engagement, and here's how to solve that. And then the actual skill building videos that they walk through, and the coaching that helps support that, and really put it into action. And that's where the magic happens. So that's the process. That's a proven process. We can keep telling people, hey, look at the camera more. Hey, look like you're excited. But in my experience, that's very rarely works, and it takes a long time. So love to connect with you. You can reach me at juliehansen.live. or my email there. I'm also Julie Hansen Sales Training on LinkedIn. I do have some resources for you here that you can grab. I've got my top 10 virtual trust builders that you can download either at my site, juliehansen.live/trust, or I think they're in the resource page here that I'm going to give you a QR code for in a moment. And of course, the book's available on Amazon, which is a good guide and will help you sort of understand what really needs to be adjusted and how much there is to it, the real depth, and why a lot of these, just throwaway statements like look at the camera or look more excited are not landing with your team. So so this is the QR code for all the recording when it comes out and the resources.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Just wanted to do a quick note here. If excuse me, if you do have your phone, you can pull it out and snap a picture of that QR code. Should take you to Julie Hansen's digital room where the recording, slides, free resources, and all the previous webinars that we've had with her, that's where they live. So the as soon as you leave here, actually, the webinar should kick you over to that resource room where you can check out more. I've also added in her LinkedIn profile. So connect with her on that one and we can start our little Q&A session if you're ready, unless you had